This video is brought to you by Trade Coffee. So we all love Rogue One, right? Even those who hate everything else Disney Star Wars has ever put out, like Rogue One. You all know I love it. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where I was talking about how it's the best Star Wars movie, and oh, would you look at that? We don't have time to reignite that debate between Rogue One and Empire because the trailer for Andor dropped. Diego Luna is back as everyone's favorite intelligence officer turned hero of the rebellion in a revolutionary drama that sheds a further light on how he became destined to give his life on Scarif in order to expose the Empire for its construction of the Death Star. And man, am I stoked. This show looks fucking great. And yeah, I know, I haven't been the biggest fan of small screen Star Wars the past year or two. I mean, hell, just Star Wars in general, I haven't really been too high on in a while. God, that's depressing. But just hear me out. Let's take a deep dive into this trailer and really just into Andor as a whole so I can show you why I think Andor has the potential to be the greatest Disney Plus Star Wars series, period. And it might be the best thing to come out of Disney Star Wars since Rogue One itself. Andor to me looks to be the shot in the arm that small screen Star Wars and really just Star Wars in general desperately needs. Watching that trailer gives me the same feeling of excitement that a great cup of coffee can. Trade Coffee is here to bring you that feeling with a cup of joe so new, so much better than the coffee you're used to that you'll never want to go without it. Trade partners with the best local roasters across America and ships straight from the roaster to your door. Holy coffee, Cassian! Trade's combination of taste test experts and technology will pair you with your ideal coffee out of 450 kinds, and then you can order it as often as you like. I've been a Trade Coffee subscriber for many years now. Seriously, probably the one subscription service that I love more than anything else, and it was like night and day going from drinking coffee as a thing to keep me awake to having the best coffee of my life. Trade introduced me to some of my favorite roasters such as Joe Coffee, Greater Goods, seriously, Greater Goods is the best, and getting that signature red bag delivered right to my door is still the highlight of my week. Right now, Trade is offering my viewers, you beautiful people out there, a total of $30 off your first order plus free shipping when you go to drinktrade.com/FilmSpeak or click the link in the description below. This offer won't last forever, so please be sure to take advantage of it while you still can. Seriously, this is a great deal. As someone who uses this service, I'm very envious of you all. Get started by taking the simple quiz at drinktrade.com/FilmSpeak and let Trade find the ideal coffee for you. That's drinktrade.com/FilmSpeak for $30 off. Make sure to use my URL and click the link below so they know that I sent you. And thank you so much to Trade Coffee for sponsoring this video. I think the reason I'm most excited for Andor is that Andor is doing for Rogue One what the Clone Wars did for the prequels. It's deepening the characters and adding context to what happens in the story of that film. Particularly, it's delivering more of the cloak and dagger underworld, the espionage, the simmering societal and political tension that led to Rogue One and to the events of the original Star Wars. This is the first of the Disney Star Wars show to take that approach to building our universe, to set it in a familiar time, picking up on things that were implied by the original work in the same way Clone Wars takes ideas that are hinted at or not fully fleshed out in the prequels and elaborates on them, making those films more enjoyable while telling a more enriched, more interesting story. I believe the biggest key to Andor's success will be this approach. People who love the prequels love the Clone Wars, and even the people who don't like the prequels love the Clone Wars, and actually I think you'll find that the Clone Wars makes people love the prequels more than they may have initially. So it stands to reason that the people who love Rogue One will probably love this, but the people who maybe weren't crazy about Rogue One will find new appreciation in that film because of what the Andor series does. But as I've said countless times before, I also think Rogue One strengthens the already amazing Star Wars. So if we follow that funnel to its logical conclusion, if Andor works as well as the Clone Wars did, it could very well enrich both Rogue One and the original Star Wars movie. I don't think any of the other Disney Plus shows have really accomplished this. Unlike with Kenobi, which tries to do that and fails miserably. Go check out my video on Kenobi if you want to hear my thoughts on that disaster. Andor feels more necessary, taking a previously established foundation and fleshing it out further. I don't know. Granted, I'm the Rogue One fanboy here, so maybe that's just my bias showing, but Kenobi faltered in how it didn't spend so much time fleshing out what was already present, as much as it did adding new characters and subplots and really winding up at a place where, all right, cool. I mean, what did this do? Do I feel like I understand Kenobi more as a person? Do I feel like I went on this life-changing journey? Did it add more to the mythology? No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It was a big, fat failure that accomplishes nothing. The Mandalorian is set in a time moderately removed from any of the films, but it's almost incidental. It's often disconnected entirely, especially in season 1 from anything else. That can be a good thing, and usually it is a good thing. It was arguably my favorite part of the first season of The Mandalorian. It's great when stories are allowed to operate independently, but since that first season, Mandalorian almost tries to have its cake and eat it too when it begins to cram it full of legacy characters, Luke Skywalker, guest appearances, and it begins to lose what was so special about that show in the first place. The Book of Boba Fett is, God, that show. It's trying to flesh out something that's known to us, but there's no inference in Return of the Jedi that Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc. That was just a popular fan fiction theory that made its way into the EU and then eventually became canon. Again, there's really nothing inherently wrong with that. It's cool if you want to tell a Boba Fett story and add new dimensions to that character. And, you know, it wasn't necessarily the thing I was looking forward to most, but if you tell the story in a way that actually has something to offer and strengthen the characters, which Book of Boba Fett completely failed at, then, I mean, I probably would have wound up enjoying the show even more. Hell, there were parts of that show that I really liked that they just completely didn't follow through with. And that's why that show gets worse the more I think about it. If you drop the ball on a show like Book of Boba Fett or Kenobi, it just comes across as an unnecessary cash-in on the goodwill, hopes, and desires of the fandom, because the fandom wanted to see a Boba Fett movie or a Boba Fett series or an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie or an Obi-Wan Kenobi series. If there's no story to tell there, why bother? Andor seems much more interested in giving us an additional set of perspectives on the characters and events of Rogue One specifically, and even the new characters such as Stellan Skarsgård's character feel like they're directly tied into Cassian Andor and the other moving pieces of Rogue One. And not even just Rogue One, but the establishing of the rebellion, the birth of this galaxy-altering movement. Andor is specifically designed to be a companion piece to explore the actual ignition of the rebellion. Rogue One dropped us in at D-Day, maybe, you know, a little bit before, the countdown to D-Day. Andor is the equivalent of making a film about the 4 years of resistance against the Nazi occupation of France before D-Day. Rogue One isn't just about Cassian or even the rebellion. Its central focus is on Jyn and Galen and how that relationship was the spark that inspired a new hope for the rebellion. The story of the prequels isn't just about the Clone Wars, it was just something mentioned. And so that show presented us with new sides of the characters and story that enhanced both. If that hasn't convinced you to give Andor a chance, then what about the quality of the creative team? I mean, you've got Tony Gilroy, the guy who was instrumental in the Bourne movies, but also returning from his work on Rogue One. Yes, I know he didn't direct it, but he was, again, instrumental in the production of it, especially when they went back for reshoots, which, when compared to Kenobi, is a giant leg up. It's the guy who created the character, essentially, coming back and building the character out further, whereas with Kenobi, it was more like a team of hired guns coming in to continue a job started by someone else. Take Solo, for instance. Regardless of your feelings towards that film as a whole, it's a movie written and conceived by the guy many thought to have refined Han Solo into the most iconic version of that character. The character that everyone truly fell in love with in Empire Strikes Back. You may disagree, but for my money, Han Solo's best parts are the ones written by Lawrence Kasdan. And so him revisiting a character he helped make iconic out of his own volition because he has more story to tell with that character feels natural. It feels like the right person, hell, the only person who really should have a crack at a character as legendary as Han Solo for a spin-off, and for my money, it worked. It added new layers and dimensions to our favorite scoundrel that charts a compelling arc from Solo all the way to Return of the Jedi, and honestly, even establishes parallels to Rey in The Force Awakens. The point is, when you have the creative driving force behind a character, passionately volunteer to explore more of that character in the world they live in, it's probably a good idea to give them a shot. Having a show like Andor, composed by the original writer of the character, is going to feel more genuine and true to who we were introduced to in Rogue One. If that's not enough, we also have Tony's brother Dan contributing, and we all love Nightcrawler, don't we? And guess what? We also have Beau Willimon, who's responsible for the 2/3 of House of Cards that were actually good, so I don't know, man. It just feels like Andor is coming to us via very capable hands with proven track records in the political thriller genre. It just feels really good to be visiting this side of Star Wars again, a more human look at the political oppression and turmoil of that era in the story that pushed people to such extremes, pushed them to take drastic action, especially with how different the world has become since Rogue One's release in 2016, with the real-world forces that threaten to instigate a fall of democracy, a rise of fascism, and the fight that we are currently in the midst of against it. It really feels like Andor has something to contribute to this conversation. The prequels have weight to them because it was Lucas coming back for that exact reason. There's an actual vision, especially when compared to Kenobi, which just feels like a product, and not the case of someone compelled to tell a particular story. Even down to the framing, the aesthetic choices, the music. Kenobi has this atmosphere of having been put together by a creative team unsure of what choices to make, whereas Andor exudes a confidence and self-assuredness that has been all but absent from Star Wars post The Last Jedi. Yes, I'm saying that because regardless of your thoughts on The Last Jedi, it is undoubtedly a confident film with strong aesthetic choices. And if I'm getting this vibe from Andor just based off of the trailers, something that I hadn't gotten at all from any of the Boba Fett or Kenobi trailers, then I think that Tony Gilroy and company are on to something. If your trailer exudes this much confidence, I can only imagine that your show is going to have even more. Now, I love Cassian Andor. That might be a controversial opinion. I don't know how many of you out there do, but for me, he's one of the best Star Wars characters ever. His moral grayness is one of the most refreshing choices that Disney Star Wars has made so far. I've always loved the parallel between how Cassian and Jyn Erso start off a bit more combative, but he comes around piece by piece to her side while simultaneously finding a sort of redemption for the darker parts of himself. And you're telling me I get to have more of that characterization? You're telling me this series will deepen my understanding of why and how he goes on that journey in Rogue One? Well, that's what the trailer is giving me, so sign me the fuck up. Give us more context as to why Cassian is resentful of being involved in the conflict for so long. Give us a bit of that darkness to show as to why he's so worn out and jaded. Show the transition from unfocused rage into focusing that aggression and rage to ignite something more than a personal vendetta. And most of all, show us how he fits even deeper into this universe. The thing that's great about Cassian is that he almost feels like a surrogate for so many of the common people we see in today's world. Someone who's just fed up with the shit, the politics, the agendas of people, and just wants freedom. He wants to see an oppressive regime fall. Throw Cassian another batch of figures in the revolutionary underworld for him to interact with. I'm particularly interested to see how Skarsgård's character, Luthen, and Cassian interact, and how Luthen influences the tapestry of Star Wars in his own way. By the looks of the trailer and the information that's been released to us, Skarsgård is someone already in the fight, who can then direct Cassian's anger at something and channel it to make a difference. Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera are two figures who also command power. The former is a senator and the latter a revolutionary. That doesn't change the fact that they hold parallel power roles over the people who respectively answer to each of them. Just because Saw's power is less legitimate than Mothma's, just because he wasn't elected to his position, does not mean he holds no political power whatsoever. Luthen, meanwhile, has the resources, the power, but no real manpower to do what it is he needs to do. He's almost almost shackled by being under watch, and so he can't act out even though he has the means to do actual damage. But when you combine his resources with all these people who are anonymous and can act out, you create a movement. You need both parties combined. Separate, it's just a bunch of unfiltered, endless rage existing on opposite ends of a chasm. And even though that rage might be fueled by the right cause, without direction and without power, it's often fruitless. Meanwhile, even though someone can have all this incredible power with which to harness change, if you don't have a movement of people with which to channel that power, you might as well not have any power at all. As much as we don't want to rely on powerful people, the Luthens, the Mothmas of the world, to make change, you need them unless you become powerful yourself. Every successful revolution in history follows this same pattern. The American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, these were revolutions carried out largely by your average everyday person. They were the ones doing the legwork, but as romantic as it sounds to say that those revolutions were fought solely at the ground level, they all had money and power thrown behind them by individuals of means. I mean, look at George Washington, right? Yeah, exactly. What the more powerful did was to be able to funnel that aggression of the people to enact change. It makes perfect sense that that's exactly how it would start in the world of Star Wars, given its parallels and commentary on our own world. And yeah, for anyone who says Star Wars isn't political, I'm sorry, Star Wars has always been political. That's part of the magic of it. For someone like Cassian, there is so much to be angry about, considering it looks like the Empire came and decimated his town, his family, took away everything he ever loved. That's a direct parallel to those in our world who are witnessing widespread injustice. For most people, sadly, there's not a lot they can do. Any single attempt to resist will destroy you. All you have is your anger. All that you can really do in most cases is voice that anger. Luthen looks to be able to be channeling Cassian's anger into something tangible because he has the resources to do so. You have the everyday, ordinary, fed-up people who don't know what to do other than protest, and then you have Luthen and Mon Mothma who have the power to put resources behind those people in order to actually create change. Luthen and Mothma look to be two people involved in high society on the inside of this machine, and they're definitely not bystanders. They seem to be diverting resources and relaying orders that have a direct effect on the events at hand, but they're not the ones getting their hands dirty. Every moment they are actively resisting the Empire, they're complacent in what the Empire does. They don't want to be responsible, but they don't want to be powerless either. Luthen and Mon Mothma look to be the type to want to have their cake and eat it too. But how do you get back what you lost and rebuild a democracy? The answer? You fight. You go to war, even if calling something a war isn't particularly romantic or appealing. That's why someone like Saw Gerrera is invaluable. He might not have the same level of resources as a Mon Mothma or a Luthen, but he gets his hands more than dirty enough to make up the difference, and he's unafraid to approach the situation honestly. He's unafraid to call it a war. Saw has been characterized as a radical, an extremist in the opposite direction of the Empire. We see what becomes of that in Rogue One. Once the rebellion is fully formed, they try to distance themselves until they inevitably need him again. What Andor seems poised to show, though, is that you really need someone like Saw. There is no moderate way out of this situation. You can't just negotiate your way through the Senate. It's just like how the Democrats are always like, votes, just vote, do that. All you need to do is vote. That's it. That'll solve the problems. You can't just vote your way out of a fascist takeover. Fascists don't play by the rules. The Empire doesn't play by the rules. They make their own rules. One of the most appealing things about Star Wars is that it has characters like Saw who will be frank about the situation, who force other characters to confront these ideas, who show the characters with the power and influence to turn the tide. The Mothma types who operate by the book, that they have to bend a rule or two. It's awesome that Saw is back, and I can't wait to see what Andor does with him, with his revolution. The freedom fighters in positions of power, such as Mon Mothma, are going to have to confront this idea. It's going to be a learning curve for them, and they're going to have to become the radicals people see Saw Gerrera as. And this isn't something new for Star Wars. Star Wars has always used resistance, rebellion, and other terms to describe the freedom fighters that we follow along with, our protagonists. And here, it looks like they're going to be using revolution, and that they're really going to have to revolt. They have to upset the order and make it violent. It looks like Andor is going to promise to explore how people come to that realization. It's an act of reflection of what Tony Gilroy sees in the world around him from 2016 onwards, a march towards theocratic fascism. If things go badly in future elections, things will be awful. It's this plea to rise up, speak out, and most importantly, not remain complacent. And it's kind of the perfect point in the Star Wars timeline to do something like this. At the moment where the fascists have taken over, the Empire rules with an iron fist, but there's still a Senate. We're in that in-between phase before it's been completely dissolved, where people can still think that moderation is the answer, to use the democratic machinations to solve the problem, which is kind of where we are now in a lot of ways. People think the problem is solved, but this isn't over, and complacency is the real problem here. When Tony Gilroy came to work on Rogue One, he wrote something about fighting oppressors, fighting an empire, fascism, whatever you want to call it. And since then, he's really been compelled by the opportunity to flesh things out based on everything, all the events, all the horrible things that have happened since 2016. Now that he's had time to think and seen where everything has gone, he can look back and sees an opportunity to give a more thoughtful explanation to the world he was inadvertently creating, a parallel to the world around him. Everything since 2016 has not only informed his opinion of the work, but the audience's reaction to the work. Rogue One is the least controversial of the Disney Star Wars films because it kind of carved out a path of its own. It wasn't hindered by what came before, could chart new territory, and, despite the setup for A New Hope, is more standalone than anything else they've made. And it's for that reason, maybe above any other, that Andor seems to be justifying why it's a television show rather than a movie. There's enough ground to cover here to justify the miniseries length runtime, to justify 2 seasons of 13 episodes. God, I just love the fact that it feels like we're going to get true television again, not these half miniseries, half limited series, half movie bullshit, 6-episode crap that we've been getting. An actual television show. I hope every decision the team have come to with Andor is in service of the story and character, and not the Star Wars brand, and certainly not the Disney brand. This is the most sure bet that Lucasfilm has had with Star Wars in a while, tied to something as uncontroversial as Rogue One. It's so untied to everything else people are passionate about, such as all the characters whose names end in Skywalker, that you won't get people rabid angry if you don't do it justice. Boba Fett and Obi-Wan have been beloved characters for decades, and it's a high risk, high reward to center something around them. Usually, you don't hit that high reward, and I mean, we've seen what happens when you screw it up on the internet. Cassian Andor is in that sweet spot. Most everyone likes him, but there isn't nearly the same kind of level of baggage attached to him. That being said, the one potential concern is that they might play it safe, since it is such an easy hit, and you don't need to upset the cart too much since people won't be super pissed if you don't deliver. I hope they do take the big risks though. This trailer seems to be alluding to it. Tony Gilroy, thankfully, seems to have a lot of artistic integrity and won't be pushed around. I'd imagine the same in regards to Beau, Willimon, and Dan Gilroy and the rest of the creatives involved in the show. But even if Tony Gilroy got the product and edit he wanted, I hope Disney didn't step in and say, hey, let's not get too crazy with what we're trying to say here for the sake of surefire cash. Although I'm not too worried about that. Why would you get someone like Beau Willimon, who wrote the incredibly political House of Cards, only to neuter his prior experience with politics? It just makes no sense. So I'm going to assume, maybe foolishly so, that we're in safe hands. By employing the best of the best, they were able to rely on their knowledge of the filmmaking craft and their ability rather than handicapping them with the latest technological fads. Look, reading Tony Gilroy's thoughts on the volume and why they were going to do it for real was one of the most reassuring things I've heard in a long time. In short, Andor looks great because they got actual people who know what they're doing and aren't just relying on new technology and the spectacle of Star Wars. I'm stoked for it. And look, yeah, I was kind of excited for the Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi too, but Andor just feels different. We'll see in a month.